All right, let's just dive straight in. We spend our entire lives building an identity, right? But what happens when the world changes so fast that the very thing you've built it on, your job, your career, just disappears? Well, today we're going to explore a pretty radical way to thrive in a future that's all about constant, unpredictable change.
Okay, picture this. Let's say you're a coder. You've spent, 20 years mastering your craft. It's not just a job, right? It's who you are.
And then, boom. Almost overnight, that entire world just vanishes. The demand completely shifts. And now you're a biofarmer. Yeah, tending to genetically engineered crops. A totally different skill set, a totally different you.
Fast forward another 20 years, and a whole new frontier opens up. So you pivot again. This time, you're a space pilot, weaving through asteroid fields.
And finally, maybe you retire into a life of the mind, and you become a philosopher. So think about that. Coder, biofarmer, space pilot, philosopher. What on earth could one person possibly have in common with all of those? The answer? Pretty much nothing. And that right there is the whole point.
So the big idea here is that the whole concept of a single static career, well, it's pretty much over. With lifespans getting longer and technology just exploding, a person born today could live through several completely disconnected professional lives. The real challenge isn't just about learning new skills. It's about surviving the death and rebirth of your identity over and over and over again.
Okay, let's make this really personal. I want you to actually think about this for a second. If your job disappeared tomorrow, just poof, gone, would your identity disappear with it? If what you do was gone, who would you be? For a lot of us, that's a terrifying question, and it's because we've been taught to build our sense of self on some seriously shaky ground.
And that brings us to what we could call the traditional model of identity, this idea of the brittle, hard shell. It's what our society, our education, pretty much everything is designed to build, a very specific and, it turns out, a very fragile kind of person.
So, what exactly is a hard shell identity? Well, it's what happens when you fuse your ego, your very sense of who you are, to what you do. It's the difference between saying, I practice medicine and I am a doctor, or I write code versus I am a coder. See the difference? It feels really strong, really secure, but it's actually incredibly brittle, because when that function goes away, that shell doesn't just crack, it shatters.
This leads us to a new rule for survival. Really a whole new way of thinking. Your identity can't be this solid, frozen thing. It has to be liquid. It needs to be like water. Because to freeze is to break.
Okay, so if the hard shell is the problem, what's the solution? Well, there's this really cool framework called the Polymorphic Identity Architecture. I know, that's a mouthful. So let's just focus on what it helps you build, a water core. Instead of that brittle outer shell, you're cultivating a fluid, adaptable center.
And the idea behind a water core identity is built on one single, really powerful idea. You are not your job. You are not your function. You are not the doer. The core part of you, the part that never, ever has to change, is the learner. Your ego gets attached to the process of learning and adapting, not to whatever specific role you happen to be in at the moment. That's a huge shift.
So let's break that down. The difference is pretty simple, but it is absolutely profound. The hard shell, it ties your ego to what you do. I am a doctor. The water core, it ties your ego to your ability to learn. I am a learner. One is rigid and super vulnerable to change. The other is fluid and resilient. It's a complete flip in where you place your sense of self-worth.
Now, this all sounds great in theory, right? But you're probably wondering, okay, how do I actually build a water core? Well, it comes down to mastering one absolutely crucial skill, what we'll call radical unlearning. And this isn't some passive thing you just think about. It's an active, daily practice. So, step one, you have to consciously detach your ego from your job. You have to literally tell yourself, what I do is not who I am. Step two, you re-anchor your identity in being the learner. That becomes your new true north. And third, you have to get really good at updating your mental models, like the second new information comes in. So it's detach, re-anchor, and update. That's the loop.
So what's the payoff? Why go through all this trouble? The goal here is to build a crisis-proof identity. We're talking about a sense of self that doesn't just survive change, but actually gets energized by it. It thrives on it.
And this is what that looks like in practice. When you have a water core, you can move between totally different fields without having a full-blown identity crisis. You're not stagnating, you're constantly growing.
You stop being defined by a job title and start being defined by a state of lifelong curiosity that sits right at the very center of who you are. It's a total game changer.
So that brings us right back to where we started, but now hopefully with a whole new way of looking at it. If you weren't your job title, who would you be? In a future of constant, relentless change, the answer might just have to be a learner. And you know what? That might just be the most powerful identity you could ever have.